The first thing Kale Morrow felt when he woke up was the taste of copper and ozone. Then pain, not the sharp kind that makes you flinch, but the deep, slow kind that tells you something fundamental has been taken from you, and whatever's left is running on fumes. He opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize. Bioluminescent moss clung to curved alloy ribs overhead, casting a sickly blue-green light that made everything look like the bottom of an aquarium. The air smelled wrong, too clean, too thin, recycled through filters designed for lungs that weren't his. "Don't move yet." The voice came from his left, low and careful. "Your nervous system is still integrating." Kale turned his head anyway, because that's what humans do when someone tells them not to move. The figure beside him was Veshin, easily 7 feet tall, with skin like polished obsidian threaded with veins of bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with some internal heartbeat. 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary folded beneath the first pair like a mantis at rest. The Veshin's face was long and angular, dominated by 3 horizontal eyes that blinked in sequence, left to right, like a status light cycling through. "Where am I?" Kale's voice came out raw, a stranger's rasp. "My workshop, beneath Sorting District 7. The Veshin pressed something against Kale's neck. It hummed, warm, then cold. "I am Tesek. I found you in the reclamation chutes 3 rotations ago. You were incomplete." Kale looked down at his body and understood. His left arm ended 4 inches below the shoulder. The stump was capped with a smooth biosynthetic seal. Veshin medical work, clean, precise, utterly alien. His right arm was his own, though it was wrapped in thin bands of regenerative mesh that glowed faintly. His legs were there, both of them, but his left knee had been replaced with a Veshin joint. A beautiful, terrible thing of interlocking crystal and living metal that moved with a fluidity no human joint could match. "What happened to me?" Tesek's 3 eyes blinked in sequence again, the Veshin equivalent of a sigh. "You were discarded. The Council's enforcement units intercepted a human transport near the Vale corridor. Your crew resisted. They were processed." A pause. "You were thrown into the reclamation stream. I don't know why you survived. Your brain was intact. Your heart was still beating. Everything else was negotiable." Kale stared at the ceiling and let the facts assemble themselves. He remembered the ship. The Harlan Das, a converted freighter running supplies to the human settlements in the fringe. He remembered the Council interceptors, sleek, silent, surrounding them like wolves around a limping deer. He remembered Captain Vasquez's voice over the comm, steady as a metronome even as the hull breach alarm screamed. "Hold position. Nobody fires. Nobody fires." And then the Council troops had boarded, and everything after that was fire and noise, and the specific, unforgettable sound of a plasma lance cutting through human bone. "The others," Kale said. "Gone." He closed his eyes. Behind his lids he saw Vasquez's face. The way she'd looked at him in the corridor, one hand on his shoulder, blood running from a cut above her eye. She'd smiled, not a brave smile, not a movie hero smile, just the small, tired smile of someone who knows what's coming and has made peace with it. Then she'd pushed him through the emergency hatch and sealed it behind her. He hadn't even had time to say her name. "How long?" he asked. "Since I found you. 12 standard rotations. Since the kinetic ban." Tesek paused, arranging instruments on a tray with the precise movements of someone who'd been a surgeon long before he'd become a scavenger. 417 standard cycles. 417 years, since the Galactic Council had banned all kinetic weapons. Every human child learned the story. When humanity first made contact with the Council, a coalition of 11 spacefaring species that had governed this arm of the galaxy for 30,000 years, things had gone well at first. Humanity was young, energetic, curious. The Council was ancient, stable, accustomed to absorbing new species the way an ocean absorbs a river. Humans were given provisional membership, trade access, limited settlement rights in the fringe systems. Then the Vethani incident happened. A human colony ship, the Meridian, was attacked by Kelser raiders in a disputed corridor. The colony's marine detachment fought back with what they had: railguns, fragmentation rounds, kinetic penetrators, the entire brutal vocabulary of projectile warfare that humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting. 43 Marines held a corridor for 11 hours against 600 Kelser shock troops. When the relief fleet arrived, the Kelser force was gone. Not retreated. Gone. The Marines had turned the corridor into a kill zone so efficient that the rescue teams found Kelser remains embedded in the bulkheads like fossils in limestone. The Council watched the battle recordings and felt something they hadn't felt in millennia: fear. Not of any single weapon, not of any single tactic, but of the philosophy behind it. Every other species in the Council had developed weapons that were elegant, precise, controllable: plasma lances, graviton disruptors, neural dampeners. Weapons designed to incapacitate, contain, manage. Weapons that reflected civilizations built on the principle that conflict should be surgical. Humans had built weapons that reflected a civilization built on a different principle entirely. When something needs to die, make sure it dies. Their weapons were not surgical, they were geological. They didn't incapacitate, they destroyed. Railgun rounds didn't stun, they turned targets into physics problems. Fragmentation warheads didn't contain, they filled spaces with death the way water fills a glass. And the humans didn't seem to find this remarkable. To them, it was just engineering. The Council banned all kinetic weapons within 60 cycles. The resolution was elegant in its thoroughness. No projectile weapons of any kind. No railguns, no firearms, no missile systems, no mass drivers, no kinetic bombardment platforms. Nothing that relied on accelerating physical mass to cause damage. The ban applied to all Council space, all trade routes, all settled systems. Violations were met with immediate and overwhelming force. The Council's own plasma-based enforcement fleet, which outgunned anything humanity could field 10,000 to 1. Humanity protested. Humanity argued. Humanity pointed out that the ban effectively stripped them of their primary means of self-defense while leaving every other species' weapon systems intact. The Council listened politely and did nothing. Within a generation, human military capability had been gutted. The colonies in the fringe became dependent on Council protection, protection that arrived late, arrived selectively, or didn't arrive at all. Human settlements were raided, absorbed, relocated. The great shipyards at Ceres and Titan were dismantled. Earth itself became a backwater, its population slowly declining as the young and ambitious left for Council core worlds where they could at least work, if not thrive. That was the official history. The version taught in Council schools and broadcast on Council networks. There was another version. The one that humans told each other in the quiet hours, in the maintenance corridors of stations where the surveillance was thin, in the cargo holds of freighters running between fringe settlements. The version that said humanity hadn't stopped. That somewhere in the deep black between stars, in hidden facilities buried under dead moons, humanity had been working on something. Not kinetic weapons. The Council's detection grid would catch those in a heartbeat. Something else. Something the Council hadn't thought to ban, because it had never occurred to them that anyone would think of it. Kale had heard the whispers, everyone had. He'd never believed them. Now, lying on a Veshan surgeon's table with half his body replaced by alien parts, he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. "Why did you save me?" he asked Tesek. The Veshan's bioluminescent veins pulsed a deeper blue. "Because I was once a physician and I took an oath, and because," he hesitated, "because I wanted to see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" Tesek set down his instruments and looked at Kale with all three eyes open. A gesture of absolute attention that Kale had learned, even in his limited experience with Veshan, was reserved for moments of genuine gravity. The rumors about what humans became after the ban. Over the next 30 rotations, Kale learned to use his new body. The Veshan knee was exquisite. It could bend in directions a human knee couldn't, absorb impacts that would shatter bone, lock rigid for stability or flow loose for speed. But it wasn't connected to a Veshan nervous system. It was connected to his, and his nervous system had opinions about what a knee should feel like that didn't match the hardware. Tesek was patient. He adjusted the neural bridges daily, calibrating the feedback loops between Kale's brain and the alien joint. "Your nervous system is remarkable," he said one morning, peeling back a sensor membrane to examine the interface. "It adapts faster than any species I've worked with. Most Veshan patients take a full cycle to integrate a replacement joint. You are already compensating unconsciously." "Humans are good at adapting," Kale said. He was standing on one leg, the Veshan knee bent at an angle that would have made his physical therapist back on Earth weep, holding the position with a stillness that surprised them both. "It's kind of our thing." "Yes," Tesek said quietly, "I am beginning to understand that." The workshop was in the underlevels of Sorting District 7, a massive facility where the waste and salvage of the orbital station above was processed, categorized, and redistributed. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions because everyone had something to hide. Veshan scavengers, Kelser mechanics, a few species Kale didn't recognize, all of them working in the blue-green twilight, stripping parts, rebuilding machines, surviving in the margins of the Council's carefully ordered world. Kale worked for his keep. Even with one arm, he was useful. Humans had a knack for improvisation that the other species found unsettling. Where a Veshan would consult a schematic and a Kelser would request replacement parts, Kale would look at a broken machine, think about it for a minute, and then fix it with whatever was lying around. He rewired a coolant pump using conductor strips from a dead communication panel. He braced a fractured load bearing, strut with tension cable and friction clamps that shouldn't have worked but did. He rebuilt a filtration unit using parts from 3 different species technology, none of which were designed to be compatible, and made them compatible anyway through a combination of creative wiring and what Tesek called an alarming comfort with structural ambiguity. There was a Kelser mechanic named Vreth who worked the adjacent bay, a quiet, methodical creature who stripped and reassembled salvage components with the patient efficiency of a jeweler. Vreth watched Kale work for 3 days without comment. On the 4th day, the Kelser brought him a broken graviton calibrator, a complex piece of Thorani engineering that had been sitting in the reject pile for months because nobody had the correct replacement resonance crystal. Kale studied it for 20 minutes. Then he pulled the crystal housing, examined the fractured resonance matrix, and tapped the crystal with his thumbnail at 4 precisely chosen points. The fracture lines shifted. The matrix realigned. The calibrator hummed to life. Vreth's compound eyes cycled through a pattern Kale hadn't seen before, rapid, irregular, almost frantic. "How?" the Kelser asked. "The fracture wasn't structural," Kale said. "It was harmonic. The crystal was vibrating against its own fault line. I just needed to shift the resonance path around the damage." "You diagnosed a harmonic fracture in a Thorani crystal matrix by tapping it with your fingernail. It's not that different from tuning a guitar." Vreth stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to his own work. But after that, the Kelser brought Kale every piece of broken equipment that the regular mechanics couldn't fix. And after that, the other workers started doing the same. Within 2 weeks, Kale had become the workshop's unofficial miracle worker, the human who could fix anything with nothing, who treated the boundaries between species technologies not as walls but as suggestions. One evening, after the shift workers had dispersed and the workshop hummed with only the ambient drone of recyclers, Kale found himself standing in front of a polished alloy panel that served as a makeshift mirror. He studied his reflection, the mismatched body, the alien knee's faint glow, the empty sleeve. He raised his right fist and threw a punch at his own shadow on the wall. Then another. Then a sequence jab, cross, hook, remembered from a boxing gym on Earth that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The movements were ragged, unbalanced. His missing arm threw off his rotation, and the Veshan knee didn't respond the way a human knee would to a pivot. He adjusted, shifted his stance, tried again. The second sequence was better, the third was clean. Tesek watched from the doorway, three eyes unblinking. He said nothing, but his bioluminescence shifted to a slow, steady pulse that Kale had come to recognize as respect. The other workers watched him with a mixture of admiration and unease. Kale noticed. He'd seen that look before, the look species gave humans when they realized that the soft, short-lived, physically unremarkable beings from the third planet of an unremarkable star were not, in fact, unremarkable at all. It was during his fourth week in the underlevels that he met Dren. She appeared in the workshop doorway one morning like a problem looking for somewhere to happen, a human woman, maybe 30, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of lean, efficient build that spoke of years of physical discipline. She had both arms, both legs, all organic as far as Kale could tell, and she moved through the crowded workshop with a fluid awareness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Not because she was threatening, because she was controlled. Every step, every shift of weight, every turn of her head was precise in a way that went beyond training into something deeper, something that lived in the body itself. "You're Morrow," she said, not a question. "Who's asking?" "Someone who knows you were on the Harlan Das. Someone who knows Captain Vasquez pushed you through an emergency hatch. Someone who's been looking for survivors." She paused. "My name is Dren. I'm here to offer you a choice." Tesek was watching from across the workshop, all three eyes fixed on the woman with an intensity Kale hadn't seen from him before. The Veshan's bioluminescence had shifted to a rapid, agitated pulse. "What choice?" Kale asked. "Come with me, learn what we've been building. Or stay here, fix machines, and live small until the council decides you're inconvenient." She looked at his missing arm, his alien knee. "You've already lost things. The question is whether you want what was lost to mean something." He should have asked more questions. He should have been cautious, skeptical, smart. But he thought of Vasquez's smile, that tired, knowing smile, and the sealed hatch, and the sound of plasma lances on the other side, and he said yes. Dren took him through the underlevels by routes he didn't know existed, maintenance tunnels, service crawlways, gaps between hull sections where the station's architecture created pockets of unmonitored space. They walked for hours, descending through layers of the station's infrastructure like divers going deep. The air grew warmer. The walls changed from standard alloy to something older, rougher, sections of the original station core that predated the council's renovations by centuries. Finally, they reached a door. Dren pressed her palm against a reader that looked human-made, crude by council standards, functional in the way human engineering always was. The door opened. Beyond it was a training hall. Kale had expected a weapons lab. He'd expected racks of contraband railguns, hidden missile systems, maybe even the mythical mass drivers that the Resistance stories always talked about. He'd expected the human answer to the kinetic ban to be kinetic weapons hidden behind better shielding. What he found was a room full of people fighting each other with their bare hands. Not brawling, not sparring, fighting, with a precision and intensity that made Dren's controlled movements look casual by comparison. Men and women of every build and background, moving through forms and exchanges that Kale's brain couldn't quite track. A woman half his size threw a man twice hers across the room using a hip rotation that seemed to violate basic physics. Two fighters circled each other in a pattern that reminded him of binary stars, each one's movement a function of the other's, until one of them broke the pattern with a strike so fast Kale only registered it by the sound it made against the practice padding. And then he saw what they were really doing. One of the fighters, a tall man with Maori tattoos covering his forearms, stepped into a sequence that started as a simple forward strike and became something else. His fist connected with a training post, and the post, A solid column of reinforced composite cracked, not from the impact, from the vibration. The man's strike had carried a frequency that resonated through the material's molecular structure, finding the harmonic that turned structural integrity into structural failure. "What is that?" Kale whispered. "That," Dren said, "is what we've been building for 400 years. She led him to the center of the hall, where an older woman was leading a group through slow-motion repetitions of a movement Kale couldn't name. The woman was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with hands that were thick with calluses and scars. She moved like water through a pipe. No wasted energy, no unnecessary motion, every inch of her body aligned to a single purpose. "When the council banned kinetic weapons," Dren said, "they thought they understood what they were banning: projectiles, ballistics, mass times velocity. They were thinking in terms of tools, objects that carry force from point A to point B." She paused. "They forgot that humans are objects too." Kale looked at her. "The human body is a kinetic weapon," Dren said. "Bone is harder than most projectile materials. Tendons store and release energy more efficiently than any spring mechanism the council's ever designed. The human nervous system can coordinate movements across hundreds of muscle groups in milliseconds. And the human brain," she smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "The human brain is the most sophisticated targeting system in the known galaxy. A human can calculate distance, angle, timing, force, and structural weakness in real time, unconsciously, while also managing fear, pain, fatigue, and the emotional complexity of looking another being in the eye while ending its life." "Martial arts," Kale said. "You're talking about martial arts." "I'm talking about what martial arts became when humanity's best combat engineers, physicists, biomechanists, and fighters spent 4 centuries developing them in secret. We call it the doctrine." The doctrine was not a single fighting style. It was a framework, a unified theory of the human body as a weapons platform. It drew from every martial tradition humanity had ever developed: the leverage principles of judo and jiu-jitsu, the striking mechanics of Muay Thai and boxing, the energy cultivation of internal Chinese arts, the weapons kata of Filipino and Japanese sword traditions adapted for empty-hand application. But it went beyond any of them. The doctrine incorporated resonance theory, the ability to deliver strikes at frequencies that matched the molecular harmonic of the target material, turning punches into precision demolition tools. It incorporated biomechanical optimization, techniques for recruiting muscle fibers in sequences that multiplied force output beyond what the body's raw strength should allow. It incorporated neural acceleration, trained reflexes so deeply embedded that they operated below conscious thought, cutting reaction times to fractions of what any other species could achieve. And it incorporated something that no amount of technology could replicate: the human willingness to suffer. "Every other species in the council designs their combat around avoiding damage," Dren explained, watching 2 fighters practice a close-range exchange that involved deliberate exposure to strikes. "They armor up, they keep distance, they use tools to project force so their bodies don't have to absorb it. Humans do the opposite. We step in. We absorb the hit. We use the pain as information and the damage as motivation. No other species in the galaxy does that. The Kelser have better reflexes. The Veshan have more limbs. The Thorani are stronger pound for pound. But none of them will take a hit that should drop them, stay on their feet through sheer bloody-mindedness and hit back harder." Kale thought about Vasquez, the cut above her eye, the blood running down her face, the smile. "When do I start?" he said. They trained him for 6 months. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, and Kale had survived the destruction of a starship and the loss of an arm. The doctrine demanded everything, not just physical conditioning, though that was brutal enough, but a fundamental rewiring of how he understood his own body. He had to unlearn 28 years of unconscious movement patterns and replace them with something deliberate, something designed. The first week nearly killed him. Not figuratively, he collapsed on the third day, his body simply refusing to process another instruction. Hana, the silver-haired instructor, stood over him while he lay on the mat, unable to move, dripping sweat into his eyes. "Get up," she said. "I can't." "You can't because you're asking your muscles to do the work. Stop asking your muscles, ask your bones." He didn't understand. Not then. It took 3 more weeks of Hana dismantling everything he thought he knew about human movement before the lesson clicked. Muscles generate force, bones transmit it. The doctrine's fundamental insight was that human skeletal structure, properly aligned, could channel force with an efficiency that made raw strength irrelevant. A strike that traveled through aligned bone was like a current through a superconductor. No loss, no waste, every joule delivered to the target with mechanical purity. The missing arm was, paradoxically, an advantage. "You're not compensating," Hana told him during a grueling session on balance and center of gravity manipulation. "You're adapting. There's a difference. Compensation is trying to do what you used to do with less. Adaptation is finding what you can do now that you couldn't before." She was right. The asymmetry of his body, combined with the Veshan knee's inhuman flexibility, gave him a movement profile that no opponent could predict. He could drop his center of gravity in directions that a symmetrical body couldn't, shift angles mid-strike, pivot on the alien joint in ways that turned disadvantage into something else entirely. Hana called it broken geometry. The other students called it terrifying. He learned resonance theory from a physicist named Markov who had hands like dinner plates and spoke about molecular harmonics the way a poet talks about meter. "Every material vibrates," Markov told them, pressing his palm flat against a block of Thorani hull alloy. "Every crystal lattice, every polymer chain, every biological membrane has a natural frequency. Find it, match it, and the material will tear itself apart. You don't need to hit hard, you need to hit right." Kale practiced on materials salvaged from the scrapyard above: Kelser chitin, Veshan biosynthetic plating, Thorani ceremonial alloys. Each one sang a different frequency, and his knuckles learned to feel for the resonance the way a safecracker feels for the click. Markov made them practice blindfolded, reading the material through their fists alone, learning to identify species-specific armor by touch in the fraction of a second between contact and commitment. The combat sparring was relentless. Kale fought every student in the hall, learning their rhythms, absorbing their techniques, building a vocabulary of movement that his body could access without conscious thought. He fought Oshi, the young woman with the burn scars, who was half his weight and twice as fast, and who taught him that speed was not about moving quickly, but about eliminating the pause between decision and action. He fought a massive Samoan named Tua who could shatter practice posts with his bare shin, and who taught him that absorbing force was an art, that the body could distribute impact across its structure like a wave breaking on rocks, spreading the energy until no single point bore enough to cause failure. He fought Dren once. She lasted 47 seconds. He lasted 12. But in those 12 seconds, he landed a strike that she hadn't seen coming, a rising elbow from his blind side, using the missing arm's absence to create a gap in her perception. She sat up from the mat, rubbing her jaw, and looked at him with something that might have been approval. "Again," she said. There were nights when the training broke him down to nothing. Nights when his body refused to cooperate, when the Veshan knee ached with a wrongness that no calibration could fix, when the phantom pain from his missing arm was so vivid he could feel fingers that weren't there trying to clench. On those nights he sat alone in the hall after everyone else had gone, staring at the practice posts, and thought about quitting. He never quit, not because he was brave, because every time the thought crossed his mind, he heard the sound of an emergency hatch sealing shut, and remembered that someone had believed he was worth saving. Tesek visited twice during the training. The Veshan surgeon watched the sessions with his 3 eyes wide open, bioluminescence pulsing in patterns Kale had learned to read as fascination mixed with something close to awe. After the second visit, Tesek adjusted the neural bridge on Kale's knee without being asked, optimizing it for the specific movement patterns the doctrine required. "You knew," Kale said to him afterward. "When you saved me, you knew about this." "I suspected," Tesek said. "I have treated many humans over the years. I notice things. The way your muscles are structured, the redundancy, the fast-twitch fiber density, the elasticity of your connective tissue. You are built for this in ways that my species is not. Evolution designed you as persistence predators. You chased your prey across open ground until it collapsed from exhaustion. That heritage is in every cell of your body." He paused. "When the Council banned your weapons, they thought they had defanged you. They didn't understand that the weapons were never the point. You were always the weapon. The guns were just convenience." The call came on a rotation that started like any other. Kale was in the training hall, working through a resonance sequence on a decommissioned Kelser armor plate, learning to feel the molecular structure through his knuckles, finding the fault lines, the frequencies that would make the alien alloy surrender to human bone. He was getting better. The plate cracked on his third strike, a clean fracture along the grain line he'd identified by touch alone. Then the hall's communication system lit up, and everything changed. A Council enforcement fleet had intercepted a human refugee convoy in the Vale Corridor, the same corridor where the Harlan Das had been taken. 12 ships, 3,000 civilians. The Council was holding them at Station Apex, a massive judicial platform in high orbit, pending processing. The Council's sterile term for what amounted to displacement, separation, and resettlement in labor camps scattered across the fringe. But this time was different. This time, the Council had announced a public tribunal, a show trial broadcast across the network to demonstrate the consequences of human defiance. The charges were absurd: possession of unlicensed kinetic potential, a legal fiction that essentially criminalized being human in Council space. The sentence was predetermined. The outcome was theater. Dren gathered the senior doctrine practitioners in the lower hall, 32 fighters, ranging from veterans who'd trained for decades to relative newcomers like Kale. She laid out the situation with military brevity. Station Apex has a garrison of 200 Council enforcement troops, mostly Kelser, some Veshan auxiliaries. The civilians are being held in the processing center on level 12. The tribunal is scheduled for 16 hours from now. It will be broadcast live to every Council world. She paused, and in the pause, Kale felt the room change. Not tension, something quieter, resolution. "We're going to walk into that station," Dren said. "We're going to walk past 200 armed troops, and we're going to walk out with 3,000 people." She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. No guns, no missiles, no kinetic weapons of any kind, just us. Someone in the back, a young woman with burned scars on her hands named Oshi, said what everyone was thinking. "They'll have plasma lances, graviton restraints, neural dampeners. We'll have nothing." "We'll have everything," Dren said. "We'll have 400 years of preparation. We'll have bodies that were designed by evolution and refined by discipline to do exactly what needs to be done. And we'll have something the Council has never once accounted for in all their strategic planning." "What's that?" Dren smiled. It was the same smile Vasquez had given him through the blood and the breach alarms. The same tired, knowing, unbreakable smile. "We'll have the willingness to get hurt and keep going." They infiltrated Station Apex in the most human way possible. They walked in the front door. The shuttle ride from the training facility had taken 4 hours. Kale spent most of it sitting across from Oshi, who was methodically wrapping her hands in strips of impact-distributing mesh, a thin, flexible material that doctrine engineers had developed from human athletic tape and Veshan bioweave. It didn't stop damage. It distributed it, spreading the force of a strike across the entire hand instead of concentrating it in the knuckles. Small advantage. The kind of small advantage that compounds across 100 engagements. "First mission?" she asked, not looking up from her wrapping. "That obvious?" You keep clenching your fist. Fighters who have done this before know to keep their hands loose until the moment. He unclenched his fist. She finished her wrapping, tested the flex, and looked up at him. The burned scars on her hands caught the shuttle's interior light, old scars, years healed, from a council enforcement action against a fringe settlement that she'd survived when she was 14. She'd been wrapping her hands in one way or another ever since. "Don't try to be brave," she said. "Brave is for people who have a choice. We don't have a choice. We have a job. Do the job and brave takes care of itself." The shuttle docked at Station Apex's civilian port without incident. The station was massive, a disc-shaped platform the size of a small city, bristling with communication arrays and docking spines, floating in high orbit above a gas giant whose amber light gave everything a warm, deceptive glow. From the outside, it looked majestic. From the inside, it felt like a machine designed to process people, wide corridors with smooth walls, directional lighting that guided foot traffic like cattle chutes, surveillance nodes at every junction. Efficient, controlled, inhuman in the way that only human architecture usually is, except this wasn't human at all. The station's security protocols were designed to detect weapons, kinetic, plasma, graviton, neural. Scanners swept every individual who entered, cataloging anything that could be classified as a threat. The 32 humans who presented themselves at the civilian intake port were scanned thoroughly. The system found nothing. No weapons, no contraband, no prohibited technology. Just 32 humans with valid transit papers, requesting access to the observation gallery for the tribunal. The security officer, a Kelser with iridescent scales and 4 compound eyes, processed them without a second glance. Humans were common on council stations, unremarkable, small, fragile, short-lived. The Kelser's compound eyes were capable of processing visual information at 12 times the speed of human eyes, tracking objects moving at velocities that would be a blur to any mammalian species. What they were not capable of was recognizing the significance of the way these particular humans moved. The economy of motion, the deliberate placement of every step, the way they maintained spacing instinctively, like a formation that had been practiced until it lived in the muscle memory. The Kelser waved them through. The most dangerous fighting force in the galaxy walked past him carrying nothing but their bodies and their training, and he never saw it coming. They split into 4 teams. Kale was with Dren's team, heading for Level 12 and the processing center. Hana led a team to the communications array, not to destroy it, but to ensure it kept broadcasting. 2 other teams positioned themselves at the garrison's ready rooms, waiting. The corridors of Station Apex were wide, well-lit, designed for species ranging from the compact Kelser to the towering Thorani. Surveillance nodes dotted every junction, their sensor arrays panning in slow arcs. Dren moved through them without hesitation. There was nothing to hide. Humans walking through a corridor, the most normal thing in the galaxy. They reached Level 12 security checkpoint at the same time as the tribunal's opening broadcast. The timing was deliberate. Every council eye in the station was focused on the tribunal feed, the spectacle of human subjugation that was supposed to reinforce the natural order. The checkpoint was manned by 4 Kelser guards, armed with plasma lances and graviton restraint projectors. Standard equipment, standard positioning, standard confidence in their superiority. Dren didn't slow down. She walked toward the checkpoint at the same unhurried pace, and the lead guard raised one chitinous hand in the universal gesture for halt. "Transit documentation for Level 12 access," the guard said, its translator rendering the clicks and whistles into flat, accentless standard. Dren handed over a data chip, The guard inserted it into the reader. The chip was legitimate forged, but legitimate enough to take 3 seconds to process instead of 1. 3 seconds was more than enough. Cale felt the moment the way a surfer feels the wave, a gathering of energy, a compression of possibility, and then release. Dren moved first. Her hand came up under the guard's lance arm, not grabbing it but redirecting it, a principle as old as Aikido, using the opponent's structure against itself. The lance swung wide. In the same motion, her other hand found the nerve cluster at the base of the Kelser's thorax, a pressure point that doctrine anatomists had mapped through years of careful study, and pressed. The guard folded like a house of cards. Cale was half a step behind her. His Veshan knee locked, pivoted, and launched him into the second guard with a lateral angle that no human skeleton should have been able to achieve. He hit the Kelser at the junction of its primary and secondary arms, a structural weak point where the exoskeletal plates overlapped, and delivered a resonance strike that vibrated through the guard's armor like a tuning fork. The armor didn't break. It didn't need to. The vibration transmitted through to the nerve clusters beneath, and the guard's body seized. Its own biology turned against it. The third guard got its lance up. The plasma beam carved a line across the corridor ceiling, raining sparks and molten alloy. One of the other fighters, a stocky man named Tors whose specialty was grappling, stepped inside the beam's arc, took a glancing burn across his left shoulder without flinching, grabbed the lance with both hands, and used the guard's own rigid grip to lever it face first into the deck. The guard hit hard enough to crack its faceplate. Tors was smiling through the pain. His shoulder was blistered and smoking, and he was smiling. The way you smile when a thing you've trained for your entire life finally happens, and your body knows exactly what to do. The fourth guard ran. The entire exchange had taken 4 seconds. Dren keyed opened the processing center doors, while Cale and Tors secured the corridor behind them. Inside, 3,000 humans looked up from the holding pens, families, workers, merchants, children. 3,000 people who had been told they were being relocated for their own safety, who had begun to suspect the truth, who were now watching a one-armed man and a bleeding, grinning stranger kick open the door to their prison. "We're leaving," Dren said, her voice carrying through the chamber with the calm authority of someone who has never once considered the possibility of failure. "Everyone up, stay together, stay behind us." The first words from the crowd were what Cale expected: confusion, fear, disbelief. But humans adapt. It took less than 30 seconds for the crowd to organize itself, parents gathering children, the young helping the old, strangers forming into groups with the instinctive cooperation that humans default to in crisis. No one needed to be told twice. No one argued. A woman near the front caught Cale's eye and nodded once tightly, like a soldier acknowledging an order. She wasn't a soldier. She was a cargo hauler from a fringe settlement. But in that moment, she was part of something older than any military, the human reflex to close ranks when the herd is threatened. They moved. The garrison response came faster than Dren had planned, 60 Kelser troops, fully armed, converging on level 12 from 3 directions. The corridors became a killing ground, but not the kind the Council expected. Plasma lances are devastating weapons at range. They project focused energy in a tight beam that can cut through starship hull plating at 50 meters. At close range, inside 2 meters, they become awkward, slow to track, dangerous to the user. Their design assumes that combat happens at distance, because for every species in the Council, combat does happen at distance. Nobody fights at arm's length. Nobody except humans. The Doctrine fighters closed the gaps. They moved through the Council troops like a virus through a bloodstream, not overwhelming force, but targeted disruption. Every engagement lasted seconds. A fighter would close the distance, absorb or redirect the initial plasma shot, and then deliver strikes that exploited anatomical weaknesses specific to each species. Kelser nerve clusters, Veshan bioluminescent nodes that, when struck at the right frequency, triggered a cascading neural shutdown. Pressure points, joint locks, resonance strikes that cracked armor from the inside out. In the Eastern Corridor, Hana's secondary team intercepted a Kelser squad that had been flanking toward the civilians. Hana moved through them with the unhurried precision of someone pruning a garden, each strike exactly placed, each guard dropping with a single, targeted intervention that shut down motor function without causing lasting damage. She was 60 years old, 130 pounds, and she disassembled 6 armed soldiers in 11 seconds. The last one had time to look confused before his legs stopped working. In a maintenance junction on level 11, a Veshan auxiliary officer cornered 2 Doctrine fighters, a pair of sisters from the Mars settlements who had trained together since childhood. The Veshan had 4 arms and a graviton disruptor, and he used all of them with lethal efficiency. The sisters worked in tandem, moving in counter-rotating patterns that made targeting impossible, each one's movement creating openings for the other. One drew the disruptor fire while the other closed the distance. The Veshan managed to catch the younger sister with a graviton pulse that pinned her against the wall and watched, astonished, as the elder sister ran up the wall itself, using the graviton field's pull as a foothold, and delivered a resonance strike to the base of his skull that dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. She pulled her sister free, and they kept moving. Kale fought his way through a knot of 3 Kelser guards in a corridor so narrow that their lances were more hindrance than help. His broken geometry was devastating in close quarters. The missing arm created angles the guards couldn't track. The Veshan knee let him change levels with inhuman speed, and his single fist delivered resonance strikes that the guard's armor had never been designed to withstand. Not because the armor was weak, because the armor had been designed to stop projectiles, plasma bolts, graviton pulses, everything that a weapon might deliver from a distance. Nobody had designed armor to stop a human fist vibrating at the resonant frequency of Kelser chitin. A lance beam caught him across the ribs. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot line of agony that made his vision tunnel and his knees buckle. He breathed through it, not past it, through it. Felt the pain as data as his instructors had taught him. Location, left thorax intercostal region. Severity, second-degree burn, no structural compromise. Functional impact, pain will reduce torso rotation by approximately 15%. Compensation, shift primary rotation to hip axis, use the Veshan knee's additional range. Time required for assessment, 1/3 of a second. He drove forward into the guard who'd shot him, inside the lance's arc, and put a resonance strike into the soft tissue beneath the Kelser's jaw. The guard dropped. Tors went down in Corridor 7, overwhelmed by 5 guards who'd cornered him in a junction. He went down fighting, broke 2 of them before a graviton restraint caught his legs, and even then, pinned to the deck and unable to move, he grabbed the ankle of the nearest guard and twisted with a technique that used the restraint's own force multiplier against the guard's joint. The guard screamed, a sound like shattering crystal, and collapsed on top of him. They found Tors afterward, buried under 3 unconscious Kelser guards, still grinning, his shoulder wound cauterized by the same plasma that had caused it. "You should see the other guys," he said, and then passed out. Hana's team reached the communications array and did exactly what they'd planned. Nothing. They secured the array, ensured the broadcast continued, and let the cameras do the rest. Every council world watched in real time as 32 unarmed humans fought their way through a garrison of 200, using nothing but their bare hands and 4 centuries of preparation. The footage was not what the council had expected to broadcast today. The final confrontation came in the docking bay. The station commander, a Thorani named Valkith, 8 feet tall and armored in ceremonial plate that had never seen actual combat, had positioned himself between the humans and the evacuation shuttles with a personal guard of 20 elite Kelser troops. The Thorani was a political appointment, not a warrior, but the Kelser elite were the Council's best, faster than standard troops, better armored, trained in coordinated combat tactics that turned them into a single organism of scales and plasma. Dren's force was down to 19 fighters. 6 were wounded badly enough that they were helping move civilians instead of fighting. Tors was unconscious. 2 others had been captured by reinforcements before Hana's secondary team had cut them free. 19 humans, 20 Kelser elite plus a Thorani commander, 3,000 civilians behind them, the galaxy watching. The docking bay was enormous, a cavernous space designed for heavy transports, with ceilings high enough to accommodate Thorani-class vessels and deck plating that rang like a drum under heavy footsteps. Emergency lights had kicked in when the fighting started, painting everything in alternating bands of red and white that made the space feel like the inside of a beating heart. The evacuation shuttles sat in their cradles along the far wall, engines cold, ramps down, waiting. Between the humans and those shuttles stood Valkith's line. The Kelser elite were arranged in a crescent formation, a textbook defensive arc that maximized their overlapping fields of fire. Each one was larger than the standard troops, augmented with subdermal armor plating and enhanced optic arrays that could track movement at speeds no organic eye should manage. Their plasma lances were military grade, not the enforcement models the garrison carried, focused tighter, hotter, with a faster cycling rate. These were weapons designed to kill other spacefaring species. They'd never been pointed at humans before, because nobody had ever considered that they'd need to be. Kale stood at the front of the line and felt the weight of the moment settle on him like a physical thing. Not fear, he'd burned through fear hours ago. Something else, something older. He thought about something Hana had told them during training, in one of those quiet moments after a brutal session when she'd sit with them and talk about what the doctrine really meant. Every species in the galaxy fights to survive, she'd said. Humans fight to survive too, but we're the only species that will also fight for a stranger. We'll take a hit meant for someone we've never met and we won't even think about it until afterward. That's not training. That's not discipline. That's what we are. He'd thought it was rhetoric at the time. Standing here now, with 3,000 strangers at his back, he understood it was a clinical observation. He thought about Vasquez. He thought about the sealed hatch and the smile and the sound of plasma on the other side. He thought about what she'd given him, not just his life, but the chance to be here now in this moment, standing between 3,000 people and the force that would cage them. He started humming. It was unconscious at first, a tune his mother used to sing when he was small, back on Earth, back before the fringe and the freighters and the war that wasn't called a war. A simple melody, rising and falling, the kind of thing that gets into your bones and lives there forever. He hummed it as he stepped forward, and the sound carried in the docking bay's acoustics, small and human and absolutely out of place in the sterile grandeur of a council military station. Dren heard it. She didn't look at him, but her shoulders settled, and she stepped forward too. One by one, the remaining fighters stepped forward. Some of them were humming the same tune, they'd heard it before, in the training halls in the quiet hours, passed from person to person the way humans pass songs. Others were silent, but they moved with the same rhythm, the same unhurried certainty. 19 humans, walking toward 20 elite Kelser guards, humming a lullaby. Commander Valkith stared at them from behind his guard line. His species communicated through subsonic rumbles that humans couldn't hear, but Kale could see the Thorani's massive hands trembling, not from fear, not exactly, but from the deep, cellular wrongness of watching prey walk toward predators without hesitation. Every instinct the Thorani possessed said that small creatures run from large ones. These small creatures were walking forward. The Thorani's ceremonial armor gleamed under the docking bay lights, pristine and untested, and for the first time in his career, Valkith wished it wasn't. "Fire," Valkith said. The Kelser elite fired. The docking bay lit up like a sun. 20 plasma lances discharged simultaneously, filling the air with energy that could cut through hull plating, slice through reinforced doors, vaporize organic tissue at the molecular level. The humans didn't stop walking. They moved through the plasma fire like rain through a forest, not untouched, but not stopped. The doctrine's final teaching, the one that separated its practitioners from every other fighting force in the galaxy, controlled absorption. The ability to read a plasma beam's trajectory in the microsecond before it fired, shift the body to present the smallest possible target, accept the burn that couldn't be avoided and keep moving. Not dodge, not deflect, accept and advance. Oshi, the young woman with the burned scars, took a beam across her thigh that should have dropped her. She staggered, caught her balance on her back foot and kept walking. Her lips were moving. Later, Kale would learn she'd been counting her steps. She'd told herself she would take 50 steps, and she was on 37, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop her before 50. 3 fighters went down. 2 more took hits that should have been crippling. Plasma burns across torsos, legs, arms, and kept coming. Their bodies running on adrenaline, training, and the specifically human refusal to stop functioning when biology says they should. The Kelser elite had never fought an enemy that did this. Their training was based on the assumption that sufficient firepower creates sufficient deterrence, that a wall of plasma will stop any charge, that living things prioritize survival over objective. Humans prioritize differently. The lines met, and the docking bay became a crucible. Kale reached the first Kelser guard at a dead run, dropped under a lance sweep using his Veshan knee's impossible flexibility, and came up inside the guard's reach with his entire body weight behind a single rising strike. The resonance frequency he chose was specific, not for armor, but for the crystalline structure of the Kelser's compound eyes. The strike connected. The guard's visual system overloaded. It went blind, staggering, and Kale was already past it, moving to the next. He fought the second guard with the economy of a man who has only one arm and knows exactly what it's worth. No wasted motion, no unnecessary strikes. Each movement flowed into the next with the fluid precision of water finding the shortest path downhill. The guard swung its lance like a club close-range panic, the weapon useless for its intended purpose, and Kale stepped inside the arc, planted his Veshan knee, and delivered 3 strikes in the space of a heartbeat. Thorax nerve cluster, primary arm joint, throat. The guard folded. Dren fought Commander Valkith herself. The Thorani was massive, strong, armored, and utterly unprepared for an opponent who weighed a quarter of what he did, and used that disparity as a weapon. Dren climbed him like a rock face, finding handholds in the gaps of his ceremonial armor, striking nerve points that his species' own medical literature said were inaccessible through plating. The literature was wrong. The doctrine's anatomists had found a way, because that's what humans do, they find a way. They find a way when there isn't one, and then they act surprised when other species call it impossible. Valkith fell to his knees. 8 feet of Thorani commander, brought down by a woman who barely reached his chest, who had found the one structural weakness in his armor, and exploited it with a precision that owed nothing to technology and everything to 400 years of human stubbornness. "You banned our weapons," Dren said, standing over him, breathing hard, blood running from a plasma burn on her arm that she seemed not to notice. "You forgot to ban us." The broadcast went out to every council world, uncut, unedited. The communication array that Hana's team had secured fed the footage directly into the network, and the network carried it to billions of screens, billions of eyes, billions of minds that had been told for 4 centuries that humans were defanged, domesticated, harmless. They watched 19 humans, bruised, burned, bleeding, some of them barely standing, escort 3,000 civilians to evacuation shuttles while 200 council troops lay incapacitated around them. No deaths. The doctrine fighters had been trained to neutralize, not kill. Every guard would recover. Every wound was precise, controlled, delivered with exactly the force needed and no more. On Kelser Prime, a defense minister watched the footage 3 times and then requested an immediate session with the military council. His analysts had already run the numbers. 32 humans against 200 armed troops, 0 fatalities inflicted, 100% mission success. The mathematical implications were staggering. If 32 could do this, what could 300 do? 3,000. If these were trainees, and the analysts suspected at least some of them were, what could the masters do? On the Veshan homeworld, a crowd gathered in the public broadcast square and watched in silence. When the footage of Kale's resonance strike cracking Kelser armor played, a low murmur ran through the assembly. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. The Veshan had their own martial traditions, ancient and honored, that the Council's modernization programs had gradually replaced with plasma technology. Watching a one-armed human do with his bare fist what their ancestors had done with 4 hands awakened something in the collective memory that had been sleeping for a very long time. On Earth, in the quiet cities and the half-empty settlements, and the old training gyms where boxing gloves still hung on hooks and judo mats still covered the floors, people watched and remembered what they were. That restraint frightened the Council more than the violence, because it meant the humans could have killed them all and chose not to. Kale helped the last of the civilians onto the shuttles. He was running on nothing, adrenaline long gone, his body a catalog of burns and bruises, the Veshan knee humming at a frequency that meant its crystal matrix was stressed near its limits. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, looked up at him as she passed. She stared at his missing arm, at the alien knee, at the burn across his ribs, at the blood drying on his face. "Are you a soldier?" she asked. Kale thought about it. He thought about Vasquez and the Harlan Das and the reclamation chutes and Tessek's workshop and the training hall and the tune his mother used to sing. He thought about 400 years of silence, of patience, of a species told to disarm itself that had responded by turning itself into the weapon. "No," he said. "I'm just a human." The girl nodded as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. Kale limped to the last shuttle and sat down heavily in a jump seat near the hatch. Through the closing door, he could see the docking bay, the scorch marks on the deck, the groaning guards, the shattered ceremonial armor of a Thorani commander who had learned too late what the word human actually meant. Dren dropped into the seat beside him. She was cradling her burned arm, and her face was drawn with pain she'd refused to show during the fight. She leaned her head back against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. "Vasquez," she said quietly, "you knew her. She saved my life. She trained with us, one of the first generation. She knew the Harlan Das was going to be intercepted. She made sure you went through that hatch because she saw something in you." Dren opened her eyes and looked at him. She was right. Kale stared at the ceiling of the shuttle, the human-built ceiling with its crude welds and functional design, and felt something crack open in his chest that wasn't a wound. It was older than that, deeper. It was the grief he'd been carrying since the hatch sealed, finally finding its shape, and the shape was not despair. It was purpose. "The Council will respond," he said. "They'll escalate, they'll ban something else. Ban humans from Council space entirely, maybe." "Let them," Dren's voice was quiet and hard like stone wrapped in cloth. "Let them ban our hands, our feet, our teeth. Let them ban the way we breathe, and the way we think, and the way we refuse to stay down when we should. They can keep writing laws against what we are, and we will keep being what we are, and eventually they'll run out of things to ban and we'll still be standing." The shuttle engines fired. The deck vibrated. Through the viewport, station apex shrank to a point of light among the stars, a council monument to order and control, briefly and thoroughly disordered by 32 people who had brought no weapons and needed none. Somewhere on the network the footage was still playing. Somewhere a Kelser security officer was reviewing the intake scans from the civilian port and finding nothing. No weapons, no contraband, no prohibited technology, just humans. And somewhere in the deep black between stars, in hidden facilities beneath dead moons, in training halls carved into asteroids and tucked into the folds of nebulae, others were watching the broadcast too. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, 4 centuries of preparation coming to a point. Cale hummed his mother's tune and let the shuttle carry him toward whatever came next. His body ached. His arm was gone and his knee was alien and his ribs were burned to the bone. He was exhausted and wounded and a long way from home. He'd never felt more human in his life. The Council had banned their weapons. Earth had responded by showing them something worse. Something the Council couldn't confiscate, couldn't regulate, couldn't scan for at a checkpoint. Something that had been 10,000 years in the making, 400 years in the refining, and was only just getting started. The weapon had always been human.